Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. The Chernobyl ant is a fly pattern that seems to be continuously evolving. New materials are added while others are taken away. But even this somewhat basic version works exceptionally well, particularly when trout are feeding on terrestrials like grasshoppers, crickets, and ants. The fly starts with a long shanked hook. Make sure to get it firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise. The next step is to load a bobbin with a spool of tan unithread. Get the thread started on the hook shank, leaving a small amount of space behind the hook eye, and take a few wraps rearward before snipping off the excess tag. For the fly's underbody, snip a 6-inch length of tan yarn free from the hank. Place one end of the yarn on top of the hook shank at the location of your tying thread, and begin taking tight wraps of thread to anchor the yarn to the top of the shank. Continue taking tight wraps rearward all the way down to the start of the hook bend. Leave your tying thread right there and begin taking touching wraps up the hook shank with the yarn. These wraps should go behind the tying thread. Pushing up on the tying thread in this manner ensures the yarn wraps are sandwiched close together. When you reach the original tie-in point with the yarn, anchor it with tight wraps of tying thread and snip the excess off close. Make sure the front end of the yarn is bound down really well. Reach for your whip finish tool and use it to do a 3 or 4 turn whip finish, seat the knot well, and snip your tying thread free. Relocate your tying thread to the back end of the body and take thread wraps to secure it there. Once the thread's secured, snip the excess tag end off close. Make sure your tying thread is right up against the yarn. Get hold of the tan strip of craft foam and measure so one end extends a little ways beyond the hook bend. Take a perpendicular thread wrap around the foam and slowly pull tight. Take a second wrap, squeeze the foam, and pull even tighter on your tying thread. Take another couple of wraps to further anchor the foam. Now, pull the foam back and take 2 wraps in front of it. Follow these with 2 more wraps over top. This sequence really helps to anchor the foam to the hook. Pick up the piece of black craft foam and place it directly on top of the tan. You can then use the same tie-in sequence as you did before. 3 or 4 wraps around the foam, then pull the foam back, take 2 around just the hook, and follow with a few more around the foam. For the legs of the fly, separate 2 full-length strands of rubber-leg material from the rest and fold them in half. Use your tying scissors to snip the midpoint, then separate the pairs into 4 equal lengths. Match up 2 of the strands and find their midpoint. Place the midpoint on top of the black foam and take a couple of thread wraps to lightly secure it. Pull the far strand to the far side of the body and the near strand toward you. The anchor point for the leg should be located right where the strips of foam meet. Take another wrap or 2 of tying thread to make sure the legs are firmly bound down and oriented correctly. Pick up the yellow, narrow strip of craft foam and place one end over top of the thread wraps you just made and take wraps to bind the foam down. This bright foam will make the fly more visible. Once it's well anchored, reach in with your tying scissors and snip the excess off close. After making sure the foam's centered and well anchored on top of the hook shank, pull both layers up and start making open spiral wraps over top of the yarn underbody with your tying thread. End at the front edge of the underbody. Pull down and forward on the tan foam and once again use the same tie-down procedure as you did at the rear of the fly. A few wraps around the foam, 2 or 3 more around just the shank, followed by a few turns around both the foam and the shank. As you may have guessed, now you're going to pull down and stretch tight the black foam and tie that in as well. Don't ignore the wraps around just the hook shank, as they really help to keep the foam from spinning. With the black foam fully anchored, the fly should look something like this. Although you can do it later, now's a good time to snip the front end of the fly off to about the same length as the back. Pick up and match up the two remaining rubber legs and again place their midpoints on top of the black foam and anchor them with wraps of tying thread. Get both strands pulled and oriented correctly on either side of the fly. Make sure they're bound down really well. Pick up the narrow orange piece of craft foam and repeat the same tie-in and trim-off procedure as you did with the yellow at the rear of the fly. With the front hotspot complete, lift up both layers of foam to expose the hook eye and take a few wraps around just the shank to anchor your thread. I like to use a hair clip or a bread twist tie to hold the rubber legs back and keep them out of the way for the next step. Reach for your whip finish tool and use it to do a 3 or 4 turn whip finish behind the eye, then seat the knot well and snip your tying thread free. You can then release the clip and free the rubber legs. To trim the legs to length, pull the front ones rearward to the back edge of the body and trim them off there. Do this with both sides of the front legs, then pull forward and basically do the same with the back legs. This results in all 8 legs being about the same length. Remove your fly from the vise and round the sharp corners off at both the front and back ends of the fly. I've found making vertical cuts with my scissors works the best. The fly should now look something like this. It's important, however, to put your fly back into the vise, but this time upside down. A drop of head cement applied to the thread wraps, both front and back, is all but necessary for this pattern, as it keeps the foam from wanting to spin around the hook shank. Although a Chernobyl ant doesn't look particularly natural, its ability to bring fish to the surface to feed is almost unsurpassed.